Welcome to DarkCresset, where shadows whisper and true horror breathes. Tonight, brace yourself for a chilling tale that blurs the line between nightmare and reality. Story number 1. It was the summer of 2003 when Tyler and Kendra, a couple from a small town in Vermont, decided to celebrate their 2-year anniversary with a quiet weekend camping in the deep woods of Black Hollow Reserve, a remote forest preserve on the northern edge of New Hampshire. They were both 27, adventurous but far from reckless, though what they would experience over the next 24 hours would change the way they saw the world and people. They arrived late on a Friday night, the sky already a deep velvet purple, trees swaying gently in the whispering wind. The site they'd chosen was a little off the beaten path. Kendra had found it in an old hiking forum that promised solitude, serenity, and a view of the stars that would make you feel like you were floating in space. It was perfect, or so they thought. As Tyler busied himself unpacking the SUV, Kendra sat on a large mossy stone near the fire ring, sipping a beer and taking in the scent of pine and earth. That's when she heard it. The sound of light footsteps crunching over dry leaves just behind the tree line. At first, she thought it might be a deer or raccoon, but the pattern was too deliberate, too human. Her body tensed, and she glanced toward Tyler, whispering sharply, "Ty, someone's out there." He paused, stood up slowly, and scanned the woods. Neither of them could see anything. No movement, no breathing. Just the creeping silence of a forest holding its breath. They made a quick decision: get out of there. They repacked everything in record time and drove nearly 4 miles deeper into the reserve, headlights off for most of the way to avoid being followed. Eventually, they reached a dead-end trailhead surrounded by thick woodland. With no other campers nearby and no lights for miles, they set up a new camp by flashlight, popped open a bottle of bourbon, and tuned into a late-night horror podcast on the portable radio, trying to laugh it off. By midnight, the air had grown cooler, the wind whispering more urgently through the trees. Tyler, buzzed and tired, passed out almost immediately after crawling into the tent. Kendra, meanwhile, lay awake, in that strange limbo between sleep and wakefulness. She could hear the chirp of insects, the occasional snap of a twig, and then, slowly, footsteps. Again, they were unmistakably human, slow, measured, and getting closer. Kendra's eyes flew open. Her heart began to pound so loud she could hear it in her ears. She reached over and shook Tyler, whispering his name with increasing desperation. But he groaned and turned over, too groggy to understand the urgency. She froze, holding her breath. The footsteps stopped just outside the tent. For a long, bone-chilling moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, clear as day, a deep male voice said, "Found you." A cold, metallic sound sliced through the night air, the unmistakable drag of a blade along nylon. Kendra stared at the ceiling of the tent as a thin line appeared above her, the knife slicing gently, methodically across the fabric. The voice returned, lower this time, whispering, "I'm going to carve both of you open." She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. Her throat closed, her arms locked at her sides, her entire body trembling under the weight of pure primal fear. The knife continued to slide along the tent, circling it slowly, dragging with a scraping sound that etched itself into her mind forever. Suddenly, instinct kicked in. Her voice finally broke free. "Tyler, get the damn rifle and shoot this bastard." There was no rifle. It was a desperate bluff, but it worked. The sound stopped. For half a second, nothing moved. Then, crack, a branch snapped. Then another. Then footsteps sprinting away, disappearing into the woods at an impossible speed. Tyler bolted upright, groggy but alert now, and stumbled out of the tent with a flashlight. He chased after the noise, but whoever, or whatever, was out there had vanished without a trace. The forest had gone completely silent, like it had swallowed the intruder whole. They decided they had to leave. Immediately, they grabbed their bags, leaped into the SUV, and that's when they saw it. Their tires were shredded. Every single one. Deep slashes carved into the rubber, like claws, or a hunting knife had been taken to them. They were trapped. Miles from the nearest highway. No signal. No flashlight batteries left. No one knew they were there. And somewhere in those woods, something was waiting. In a frantic attempt at survival, Tyler tried using a tiny camping air compressor, hoping it might somehow inflate the mangled tires enough to drive slowly back to the nearest outpost. It didn't work. The gashes were too deep. Still, he kept trying, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. Then, another noise. Far off. The same footsteps, but this time faster, more frenzied, like someone circling them in the dark. Kendra clutched a tent pole, the closest thing to a weapon she could find, her knuckles white. An hour passed. Then two. Just when they'd started losing hope, headlights appeared down the distant trail. A forest ranger's truck. The man inside, Officer Langdon, looked like a walking ghost himself, pale and serious. "You two all right?" he asked, pulling up beside them. "We've had reports. Strange activity in this region. Been looking all night." They explained everything in a rush. What they'd heard, what they saw, what almost happened. Langdon's expression hardened. "I believe you," he said, then paused. "We've had incidents. 2 hikers were found 3 days ago about 10 miles east of here, slashed, tortured. We think it's the same guy. He targets remote campers. No tracks, no prints, just gone." Kendra's legs gave out. Tyler held her. The ranger towed them back to the nearest town, where they replaced the tires and called their families. They were safe, but forever changed. Tyler would later say that he hadn't heard the voice himself. He hadn't seen the knife. But Kendra, she'd heard it so clearly that night, she still dreams about it. Sometimes, she wakes up to the sound of that same voice, whispering just inches from her face. "Found you." She'll sit bolt upright, heart racing, drenched in sweat. She checks every window, every door, the backyard, the lock on the garage. But nothing's ever there. Nothing she can see. People think the scariest thing in the woods is a wild animal, a bear, a mountain lion. But it's not. It's a man who doesn't belong, who hides in the dark where no one can hear you scream. Black Hollow Reserve was eventually closed to the public later that fall, after 3 more campers went missing. No arrests were ever made, no bodies ever recovered, just blood and tents torn open with a knife. Some say the killer still roams those woods. Others believe he's moved on to new forests. But Kendra believes he's still out there. And every now and then, when the wind is just right, she swears she hears footsteps coming closer. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Story number 2. I was 15 when I started babysitting to earn a little money on the side. Not for anything sensible like school supplies or saving up for a car. No, I was obsessed with a limited edition collector's vinyl series from some obscure Scandinavian death metal band. Pretty niche, I know. My uncle worked in real estate and often passed my name around to clients who needed a sitter on short notice. That's how I ended up one fog-drenched October evening in 2013, standing on the porch of a sleek, sterile house in a new development on the edge of Marlow, Oregon. The home belonged to a couple I'd never met, Dr. Vaughn and his wife, Alara. They were both radiologists, well-dressed, too formal, and eerily polite in a way that didn't feel human. They had 2 children, a boy named Ellis, age 8, and a girl named Mara, who was 10, quiet, pale, eyes too sharp. I remember thinking they didn't blink nearly enough. As the parents ran through the usual checklist, bedtime, allergies, emergency numbers, they made a half-hearted joke about no boys sneaking over and left in a hurry. It struck me odd that they locked the door from the outside with an actual key. I told myself it was just a high-end security feature. The instant the engine of their SUV faded into the mist, Mara turned to me with a wide grin and saying in a glassy voice, "Now it's just us in the house, no one else around." Her voice had that eerie music box quality. Then Ellis piped up, smiling like he was trying to mimic her. "Want to see something we're not supposed to show?" I laughed nervously and shook my head, changing the subject. I suggested watching a movie. Nothing scary, just a cartoon or something light. But when I flipped on the TV, they begged to watch a horror anthology that was definitely not made for kids. I politely refused. I told them their parents had left instructions and we were going to follow them. They stared at me blankly for a long time. Then Mara spoke again. "We'll just play in the basement instead." I immediately said no. Something about the way she said basement sent a chill through my spine. She didn't argue. She just smiled. I busied myself with making dinner, sandwiches and apple slices for the kids, and a small veggie wrap for myself. As I started pulling items from the fridge, I heard a loud smash from the hallway. I ran out and found Ellis standing over a shattered decorative mirror. When I asked him what happened, he just said, "It was watching me wrong." No remorse, no apology. Just a cold explanation like he'd spilled a drink, not broken glass across a hardwood floor. I cleaned it up as best I could, uneasy under their intense, unblinking gaze. By the time I returned to the kitchen, I found Mara quietly humming and tapping the knife drawer rhythmically. I gently closed it and said dinner was ready. As the kids sat at the table, I went to the fridge to grab sodas. When I turned around, neither had touched their food. "Aren't you hungry?" I asked. Mara tilted her head and said, "You first." My stomach tightened instantly. The tone wasn't teasing. It was cold, calculated. Ellis joined in. "Yeah, we want to see if you like it." Something inside me screamed. My instincts kicked in like a fire alarm. I slowly opened the top half of my wrap, pretending to be casual. That's when I saw it, tiny, shimmering shards of glass glinting between the lettuce and tortilla. My hands went numb. My breath hitched. The pieces were unmistakable, like crushed light bulbs or maybe the broken mirror. My throat tightened as the realization hit. They had done this, quietly, while I was only a room away, while they smiled and watched me. I didn't even try to play nice. "Are you crazy?" I yelled, slamming the wrap onto the counter. "Do you know what this could have done to me?" But instead of flinching or looking ashamed, they both started laughing. But it wasn't the laugh of children. No, this was low, guttural, unnatural. Like something was imitating laughter but didn't understand the rhythm. Their faces didn't match the sound. That deadpan stare stayed frozen while the low, menacing sound shook the air. I backed out of the room, pulled out my phone, and called my older cousin Gia, who lived 10 minutes away. I didn't explain. I just begged her to come over immediately. "Bring your bat," I said. The kids followed me, step for step, not saying a word now. I locked myself in the bathroom and listened. On the other side of the door, Mara whispered, "She's not fun. Let's find a better one next time." I didn't know if she meant Babysitter or something else entirely. Gia arrived within 15 minutes, pounded on the door, and I bolted out. The kids didn't even flinch when she came in. Gia asked if everything was all right, but I couldn't explain it without sounding insane. I just begged her to stay until the parents got back. When the Vaughns arrived, at exactly midnight on the dot, I told them about the broken mirror and how the kids hadn't eaten. I didn't mention the sandwich. I didn't mention the laughter. I was scared I wouldn't be believed. Or worse, that they already knew. I never went back. Not even to pick up the $80 I was promised. But that's not the end. About a year later, Gia forwarded me a local news article she stumbled upon while doing a property search. The Vaughn's house had been sold suddenly. No for sale listing, no photos. The article said authorities were investigating a tragic fire that had destroyed the basement of the home, but it was ruled accidental. What the article buried in the final paragraph was the unsettling discovery made by firefighters. Several old, child-sized shoes and antique dolls found behind a false wall. Some shoes were decades old, scorched and blackened. No one could explain why they were there or why the wall had been sealed with nails from the inside. Sometimes I wonder what those kids were, because I don't think they were kids at all, and I think the Vaughns knew it. Every now and then, I still get mail addressed to me from that neighborhood. Handwritten, no return address. Inside are drawings, stick figures with wide black eyes. One has a mouth full of shards. Another has a girl with hair in pigtails and a red dress, holding a sandwich with something sparkling inside. And scrawled beneath them in shaky letters, it always says the same thing. Your turn next time. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Story number 3. It was the end of September 2021 when it all happened. A trip we thought would be nothing more than a fun getaway from our noisy, stressful lives. I was 26 at the time, working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, and desperate for a break. So when my friend Rhea invited me and 3 others, Cam, Zoe, and Travis, on a road trip to a secluded mountain cabin her aunt had left her, I didn't think twice. I should have. The place was tucked away in the Cascade Mountains, in the far reaches of Washington State. Rhea said her aunt had passed a year prior, and the cabin had just been sitting there since, untouched, abandoned in the quiet wilderness. She finally worked up the courage to visit it again, and she wanted us with her. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend, maybe some hiking, grilling, and ghost stories by the fire. Just harmless, old-school bonding time. We left Seattle around 4:30 p.m. on a chilly Friday evening. Traffic was rough, and we had to make a few stops along the way. Gas, snacks, and a quick dinner. By the time we turned off the highway and onto the winding forest roads, the sun had dipped completely behind the horizon, leaving us in a heavy, creeping darkness. Our GPS lost signal miles back, and the only directions we had were screenshots from Rhea's phone. She insisted she remembered the way, but her tone betrayed the slight tremor of uncertainty. By the time we reached the long dirt road that led to the property, it was nearly 9 p.m. Trees pressed in on both sides, their black silhouettes leaning like watchers in the night. The headlights cut through thick fog as we drove slowly, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Suddenly, Rhea slammed the brakes and we all jolted forward in our seats. "What the hell?" Travis muttered. The cabin was just ahead, but the front door was wide open. And worse, there was a faint flicker of light moving inside. At first, I thought it might have been the reflection of our headlights, but no. Zoe leaned forward and whispered, "That's a flashlight. Someone's inside." For a few seconds, none of us said anything. The car idled quietly. The engine hummed like a heartbeat, the fog curling up around the tires. I felt my skin crawl. Someone was in that cabin. Before we could even agree on what to do, Rhea suddenly hit the gas and drove straight up the driveway, stopping just before the front porch. She rolled down the window and slammed her palm against the horn, holding it down in one long, deafening blast. 10 seconds, maybe more. We all stared wide-eyed as the flashlight inside the cabin immediately flickered out. Now it was just darkness. The door still hung open. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice strained. "We should call someone." But Rhea had already thrown the car in park, jumped out, and was storming toward the cabin with nothing but her phone flashlight and what I could only describe as pure adrenaline. "We're not letting some junkie squat in my aunt's house," she spat. "I'm done being afraid of this place." Against better judgment, we followed. The porch creaked under our feet as we stepped up behind her. The cold air bit at my face. I remember the smell, pine needles, old wood, and something else, like wet iron. Rhea kicked the door open the rest of the way and shouted into the void, "Whoever's in here, you better get out right now." Her voice echoed down the hallways like it didn't belong. We entered together, our footsteps hesitant on the hardwood floor. The cabin was completely dark except for our phone lights. The power, apparently, hadn't been turned back on. I remember how the walls were lined with dusty photographs and an old cuckoo clock ticking faintly above the fireplace, which only made everything feel eerier. "Zoe, check the kitchen. Cam, see the back bedroom. Travis, you're with me, Rhea ordered like she was a SWAT captain. I went with Travis down the hallway, our flashlights shaking as we walked. The boards creaked beneath us with every step. I was assigned the main bedroom at the end of the corridor, while Travis peeked into a bathroom and side closet. The door to the bedroom was already ajar, swinging slightly as though it had just been pushed. I pushed it open fully and stepped inside. The bed was unmade. Dust particles floated in the beam of my light. At first glance, no one was there, but the longer I stood, the more that heavy feeling settled in my chest. Then I saw the closet. Sliding doors, shut tight. A dread began to pool in my stomach. I took a step closer. My flashlight dimmed slightly, flickering like it had suddenly caught a cold. I was just about to reach for the closet handle when I heard screaming, two voices, distant but blood-curdling, coming from downstairs. Rhea and Cam. Before I could react, the closet door suddenly flung open with explosive force, and a man lunged at me. He tackled me hard, sending me crashing into the wall. His grip was like iron, his breath hot and rancid against my face. I couldn't scream at first, just struggle, but the fear gave me strength, and I yelled out with everything I had. Within seconds, Travis and Zoe came sprinting down the hall, yanking the man off me just as he tried to reach for something tucked in his waistband. He slipped free and bolted down the stairs. We followed, but he was fast, like he'd done this before. The front door banged open and slammed shut behind him. He vanished into the woods, swallowed by the trees. But what waited for us downstairs was worse, much worse. We regrouped in the basement. Rhea and Cam were pale, visibly shaken. The moment we stepped foot on the basement floor, the smell hit us, something sour and rotten. Then came the sight. Two bodies, crumpled in the corner like discarded mannequins. Only they weren't mannequins. They were real, human, and brutally mutilated. Their limbs had been severed. One was missing an entire arm. The other's face unrecognizable beneath blood and gashes. Blood soaked into the concrete floor, a red halo beneath them. Cam stumbled backward and threw up. Zoe covered her mouth and dropped her phone. I could barely breathe. My vision tunneled. I felt like my body wasn't my own. We ran. We didn't even speak. We just ran. Out the door, into the car, and back down the dirt road at speeds that made the tires slide across gravel. Rhea called 911 once we were far enough away to get a signal. Her voice was shaking. She could barely form words. Within the hour, the sheriff's department had arrived. Floodlights bathed the cabin in white. Yellow tape stretched across the porch. Forensics vans pulled in behind us. Officers asked us dozens of questions. What we saw, what we did, if we knew the victims. We didn't. Eventually, the bodies were identified as two local house painters. Both men, both missing for nearly a month. They weren't from the area. No family nearby. No clear connection to the cabin. As for the man who attacked me, nothing. No prints. No leads. No suspect. They said he must have taken off into the national forest, and finding someone in that dense of terrain was next to impossible. We drove back to Seattle the next morning, silent. None of us spoke for almost 2 weeks. Rhea never went back to the cabin. Last I heard, she hired someone to burn it down. But for a while, it haunted us. We'd wake up in the middle of the night in cold sweats. I kept seeing that man's face in every shadow. Sometimes I'd hear creaks in the hallway, like someone pacing just out of view. I still don't know what he was doing there, or why those bodies were in the basement. Maybe he was living in that cabin. Maybe he lured them there. Maybe we walked into something we were never meant to find. I never expected a weekend escape to turn into something I'd be retelling with trembling hands years later. But that's the thing about horror. It doesn't care about timing. It doesn't need permission. It just shows up when you least expect it. If this story haunted your thoughts, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Darkness awaits, only at DarkCresset.